Please welcome your panelists for Building Bridges to Developing Economies, Reports from Field Practice, moderated by Senior Fellow and founder of Milken Institute Financial Innovations Labs, Glenn Yago.
Thank you very much thanks very much for joining us. Now, why field practice? You know, practice makes perfect. We all know that. And what we do in Israel, the first part I want to pull up slide 77, is just run through a brief report of what we've been doing in the field in Israel as the delivery vehicle for disruptive technologies and solutions and building capacity and training folks on young Israelis on these issues. And we're now expanding that to a global fellows program this coming year with students in the international school at Hebrew University from Africa and from India and from other parts of Asia in doing so. So this is our fellows program, which is really our force multiplier. With applied research, we've been working as the systems of financial regulation have changed and the attempt to create more competition in the banking sector. We're working on the first social bank that will hopefully is going through the regulatory process. Working on building a tourism improvement district, also working, as you'll see, with our neighbors on developing cultural heritage tourism and driving tourism in the area, and a series of our financial innovations labs that we do in that geography, focused on everything along with the California Israel Innovation Agreement that the Prime Minister and the Governor of California signed 4 years ago. We've gone through a number of years, which we'll be celebrating at a reception. We hope you'll join us down at Poolside East later this evening. And looking at the Jerusalem municipal budget, looking at projects that come out of, we'll hear about this, cabinet decisions and outreach to Africa and India that have been made through the government, and staffing those things. And then also, and we go to the next slide, if we can, or I guess I can advance this, to really how the clusters, how they're deployed. We have capacity building with our fellows that work on development finance, and that's what we're going to be talking about here in terms of building bridges to these economies that are so important, environmental finance, and then social and small and impact investing, that term that's been used a lot here today. It was great to hear the CEO of Credit Suisse say that impact investing and sustainable development aren't marginal issues anymore, but central to the core of building portfolios. And these are our fellows. This is Shani Dodge and Rotem Zellinger, who at the Volcani Institute, which launches 70% of the agri-tech patents there, and the Israel Innovation Authority that we'll hear from Gil Shaki in our next working session. And this is a group, Dror Shavdron, who's working on the India implementation of the India, and Anat, who works, Carmel, who works in Eli's office on these issues, and coordinating these things. And in environmental finance, you can swiftly read through, and Safa, Yunus, MSW and MBA, working in our Ministry of Social Welfare on impact bonds and on ideas of revolutionizing ways of building channels of capital to underserved populations. And of course, at the Ministry of Finance, that's where the money is, or as an active investor. And the outcomes have led a series of areas through on green buildings and energy, the work that we've been really privileged to do with our colleagues up at UC Berkeley and the University of California. The president, we have President John Napolitano next week in Jerusalem, talking about and working with the Higher Education Council on commercialization ideas and blending those in the courses at Berkeley and at San Diego that have been taught, and field seminars here in California. On water tech transfer, we have Nati Barak from Netafim here, and the R&D areas that are around that, the circular economy. And this was the opening of the Blum Lab for developing economies, which is part of the Blum Center initiatives throughout all of the 10 UCs. We're the first one to be outside of the United States, and very delighted to do so. And there you'll see us with our colleagues that came from Tanzania and Uganda and Kenya, the president of Entebbe, if you can imagine the great poetry of that, in Jerusalem, opening up that lab just this last September. The labs we did with there's Senator Stern from the California Senate, and Gil Shaki and colleagues from the Ministry of Energy that were working on energy, and then the MOU that the government of Israel, Eli led that effort, working with Power Africa, Andrew Hershkowitz there from Pretoria, in terms of electrification. And then the title of this session really is based on a report you can download from our site. It was presented in the Knesset in January and trying to populate this. And we were delighted. This was a chart we used last year. We can see it again of why this is so important is why the developing economies and the emerging economies are where the action is. This is a major demographic transition, and President Rivlin used that slide. I love it when people use our data at the Globes conference in Jerusalem last December. And learning on the water projects, we've got 60 water tech transfer projects in the field here in California, working with the State Treasurer's Office. And then those of you that were at our session this morning and heard from Dr. Kim and from Stephanie von Göteborg from the IFC, the program that we have in Washington, training the IFC fellows who presented, our fellows here from Hebrew University, and then the teaching up at Berkeley, and folks that come in from all over the world to talk to us. The social bank I mentioned, and then I just have to mention this because this was an 8-year project working, a very tough one, tough deal, working with our neighbors in the Palestinian Authority to work on sewage and water treatment and the growth of the agricultural plan for the area between Jerusalem and the Dead Sea, which was finally approved this year, and to acknowledge the role of all of the folks there, the Israeli Water Commissioner, the Palestinian Water Commissioner, Major General Pauly Mordechai, all the people that were involved in making that project come to, and this is the new program we'll launch based on the program here in California in development practice at Hebrew University this next fall, and just the activities that go on in our alumni and what they're doing. So that's the report. That's the report. I did it in 5, Ellie. So let's just go on to just a few opening points I would like to make. If you look at slide 2, if you could pull that up for a moment. We're actually going in the wrong direction. I think this has come up several times, whether we're talking about climate change and the fact of increasing global warming, and in terms of the slowing of growth and long-term average rates of growth. The investments in emerging markets and domestic and developing economies has halved since 2010. Cross-border financial flows have fallen by 2/3, and Laura Tyson's going to join us and moderate the private session. But she and Susan Lund just had a piece in Foreign Affairs about this that I encourage everyone to read. That we look at portfolio flows and FDI flows. They grew to 23% of global GDP in 2008. They've fallen to just about 6%. The investment growth in long-term is below its long-term average. In the next slide, if you can look at that again, if we move on to the next slide, of a slowing of growth that's reflected in the slowing of investment growth, which was a topic at the IMF meetings recently, and a great deal of market uncertainty and policy uncertainty that makes the success of globalization problematic if we're going to finish the first quarter of the 21st century anywhere near where we need to be in terms of carving channels of capital into developing economies. So how are we going to overcome that problem? How can we deal with that problem? And for that, I wanted to turn initially to Julie Monaco. And all of the bios, I think you know the importance of these folks as financial innovators. And she heads up all the area of public sector investment at Citi and her whole team globally. And they've been great allies of us, Jeremy Bentley and the folks at the Tel Aviv Financial Tech Lab.
Okay.
Tell us what you think. What do we need to do?
All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here today. And I run our public sector banking group. And if you could turn slide 67, please. I think that at Citi, what we're focused on is, as we look at the SDGs, and this frames the problem. We all know what the problem is. You talk about 1.5 billion people still not having access to electricity, and a billion people not having access to safe water. These are all the problems that we've been talking about all week here. And I think what's good about it is we're getting much more specific about how to solve infrastructure to solve these specific problems of the SDGs. In the past, when we talked about infrastructure and the importance of infrastructure, it was always about GDP growth, and GDP growth certainly will be the outcome if we invest more in infrastructure. But we've been focusing in 2 areas. One is really focused on how do we develop infrastructure as an asset class. And I'll talk about the reason why we have to get it to an asset class in a minute, because there's just too much money sitting on the sidelines, and we need too much money to solve all these problems. And we're not going to solve them with the traditional financing that has been there in the past. We're going to need innovation in the way that we do that. So if you turn to the next slide, so what is the problem we're facing? Well, in real GDP terms, countries are actually reducing, both in the advanced and the emerging economies, are reducing the percentage of their GDP that they're dedicated to infrastructure. So we are going backwards, what you just talked about. We're not investing enough in infrastructure, and you can see it as much in the developed countries as the developing countries. And so because it's a problem that's across the board, there's going to be a lot of competition for this capital once we get it off of the sidelines. And obviously, the business case has been made many times in terms of the fact that for every 1% you invest in infrastructure, you get 1.2% investment in GDP growth. And that has always been really the focus for governments on one of the reasons why they want to invest in infrastructure. But what's the problem? The problem is that over 90% of infrastructure is still financed on the balance sheet of governments. Governments can't afford to fill the funding gap for the demand that's out there. So we have to get the private sector money off of the sidelines. So if you turn to 69, please, slide 69. So what's the biggest challenge? Well, it is matching up investors with investments. But I would argue that there is a risk taker for every type of risk. And that if we were able to dissect the different risks that exist in infrastructure finance, that we can solve the problem. And that's some of what we're going to talk about later on in the session, is innovation that's happening in finance to solve some of these problems. But when we look at it, $90 trillion of infrastructure is needed by 2030. We keep talking about how we're going to make billions to trillions to get to this 3.8%. And the only way it's going to happen is if we get institutional money to invest in infrastructure. And at Citi, we're looking at how can we structure deals in a way that institutional investors would feel as comfortable about investing in those projects as they would investing in sovereign risk. Institutional investors have gotten very comfortable going around the world and investing in sovereign debt. So how do we structure these projects in a way that would make it a differential off of investing in a bond of a developing country? And what you have to do is on the side of that is all down the side. There's transparency and creating visibility. We would argue the biggest problem is not about the money. It's not about matching up investors to the investments. It really is about investable projects and how to get those investable projects. And there's a lot that has to be done around project preparation, around the rule of law, the regulatory environment, the development of the local capital environment. So we often refer to it as a Rubik's Cube. There's a lot of different things that have to be solved at the same time, and there's a lot of effort going on in the industry by various groups to get all of that project preparation so that we can accelerate how many projects are bankable and ready to go. And so I'll talk a little bit later, after my other panelists talk about the kind of innovation we're seeing in blended finance, specifically for the most vulnerable countries that really need help. And then some of the newer transactions that we're seeing that are capital markets oriented, that we're seeing some of the larger developing economies. And I think it will show you that we're moving in the right direction around financial innovation.
Terrific. We're going to drill into this much more. If you just pull up slide 5 for a moment to set the broad sweep of globalization and the importance of the markets. That was this time in English, not in Hebrew, that you saw from President Rivlin, about this structural shift. This has happened once before at the end of the 19th century when the New World surpassed the Old World in PPP GDP shares. And this is where if you want to have customers in the future, if you want to have new markets, you have to look at sub-Saharan Africa. You have to look at Asia. And that's certainly a perspective that you've been working on, Eli. How do you develop policies and programs that would address this?
So thanks, Glenn. In life, people say timing is everything. And the fact of the matter is that the reason Israel became so involved in this over the last few years is because there were a number of geopolitical factors which drove the desire of Prime Minister Netanyahu to actually better leverage Israel's capabilities in order to further broaden and deepen the diplomatic ties. After having put together now 3 sort of major cabinet resolutions, which are all being acted on, one on Africa, one on China, one on India, we've gotten to learn a lot about what works, about what doesn't work, and how we can think about our development plans going forward. What we've decided in Israel is that the strategy that we're developing is going to be based on sort of 3 pillars that we have in terms of our competitive advantages. The first is our innovation. Our innovation as it relates to the SDGs, and I think there's a slide, it might be slide 9 if memory serves, if you could call that up. But most people, I'm sure many of you in the audience are familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, and if you look at this without drilling down on each and every one, you'll recognize that Israel has a lot of competitive advantage in terms of hunger and water and energy and whatnot. So we want to leverage those competitive advantages to advance global goals as articulated by the United Nations. The second thing is, and this really can be reconciled quite easily with what Julie said, we want to leverage the private sector a lot more. We want to, not just the financial institutions, but first and foremost, the technologies themselves. Obviously, it's not just as simple as matching investable projects and sort of aligning the pipeline and addressing the regulatory issues. You actually need to bring the right appropriate products to address these 17 very significant challenges. And what we've determined is that the best way to do that is using technologies that exist in the private sector. And then the final thing, and this really dovetails with what Julie mentioned, is innovation in terms of finance. There's all sorts of blended finance solutions that are being put together. You're right that there isn't enough. Governments cannot and will not finance this independently. What we're working on right now, we hope to have something to announce in the coming months. We're speaking with a lot of these sort of global development banks, World Bank, IDB, et cetera, and we're putting together a fund, which would be a certain amount of funding, a certain amount of capital that would be government capital, Israeli government capital, a large percentage which would be financial institution capital, and part of it that would also be from some global institutional bank. And the expectation is that the government would take on the most risk, the first to fail, those sort of concepts, but you can actually leverage private sector both in terms of finance and in terms of technology to advance these sort of 17 SDGs that the UN has articulated.
Terrific. And then the partnerships that have evolved, and Claire, as one of the real thought and action leaders in Rwanda, and now with President Kagame ascending to becoming the president of the African Union, the leadership that a country like Rwanda, who went, as Israel has, through dark times, to emerge with technology and looking at the 2020 plans, you manage all of those processes. So how do you see this challenge of building investable projects and what's needed from the investment community to accelerate that?
So thank you very much, Glenn, and I'm very pleased to be joining you this afternoon. For us, it started with a goal and an ambition, and that's our president's goal and ambition, which is making Rwanda a middle-income status country. And what that needed is a very different way of approaching how we develop our economy as Rwanda. And so before that, a lot of efforts was done by government. So building infrastructure, running businesses, all of that was very much public sector driven. And so the question was how do we involve private sector a lot more than we're doing today? And so we discovered two things that we needed to focus on. One was creating a regulatory environment that would make Rwanda very competitive so that private sector can find it stable, predictable, and secure in the long term. But on the other hand, we also thought it's not enough to just create an environment or make regulations and policies sufficient. We actually learned that government must actually create and catalyze projects, especially when we talk about matching investors and investments. We found that government had a very strong role in actually making that catalyzing role possible. I'll give you two quick examples in both areas. On making it easy to do business in the country, we focus very much on understanding or thinking like a private sector company. What do they need? What do they want? We discovered this World Bank Doing Business report that actually guides a country to do that. And we went and really understood it very, very deeply. And we started to reform our country from the time a company starts a business to the time they go to a bank to get credit, they get property, they go to court if they have a problem, or they even have to become insolvent. And in 10 years, Rwanda moved from being the 158th place to do business in the world to 41. Today, we're ranked the 41st easiest place to do business in the world. We're ranked the second in Africa. When it comes to security, Rwanda is ranked the 9th safest country in the world by the World Economic Forum. And so these efforts of making the environment very predictable, very stable, and the same investors like to find the 3 S's available. They want stability, they want security, and they also want to make sure that when they're in the country, they're able to have sustainability of their project. So we worked on that on the first part. On the second part, we found that it's not enough to make it attractive. Yes, some investors will come and that's sufficient, but also where you really want money to go or investors to go, you really must catalyze, create a project, and understand what challenges the project has, address those so money can come into those projects. I want to give an example that we've worked on learning, especially from Israel, and that's our Kigali Innovation City. we wanted to drive innovation in the country. And so government decided to build a city, an innovation city. We invested in infrastructure, invested in the land. And then we also found out that skills is a big issue. How do you ensure that you have the skills that can drive innovation? We came to the US, negotiated with a company, with a university called Carnegie Mellon University, structured a deal with them. This is something they're not thinking about. They're not thinking about going to Africa or to Rwanda. But we had to think about something very innovative and creative to make it attractive for them to come. They came and set up in Rwanda. Today, we have 2 or 3 other universities that have set up after they came. But we had to create this opportunity and show that it works so other universities can come. Then we also found that money was an issue. Young entrepreneurs in Rwanda that have innovative ideas, getting money to actually develop the idea further was a problem. So we, again, another project that, and I see Angela is here, we created something called the Rwanda Innovation Fund, private company working with the government as a fund manager. We went to the African Development Bank, presented the idea. The African Development Bank had never given money to an innovation fund. They're used to financing bridges and roads and electricity. Telling them to put money in an innovation fund was something they'd never heard about. We had to work with them for a year and show how it was going to be very useful. So bringing a development financial institution, government, a fund manager together to create a fund that is now beginning to take off so that entrepreneurs in Rwanda can actually get money to take their ideas to market. So in short, we believe that making it easy as an environment was very important, but also finding very creative ways to actually structure deals so that money can go where you want it to go.
And the financial technology transfer here is so interesting, since very much as in Israel, the tech sector has been so key in the growth. Knowledge-based, knowledge capital exports have been by the catalytic investment of the government coming in through the Office of the Chief Scientist, now the Israel Innovation Authority. And maybe just 2 quick other case studies of that. Pull up slide 30 was just the deployment of field utility solar that supplanted at the Gahazo Shalom Youth Village.
Looks familiar.
It looks familiar. They're 40 kilometers from Kigali. That supports the health benefits for the children that were initially from the victims of the genocide, just as from our youth villages in Israel that Anne brought over as a social innovation. Mm-hmm. But then also, if you look at slide 33, this extension of that in Ignite Energy is putting it on off-grid as well. Mm-hmm. But I just want to ask Peretz, who's been a very thought leader in developing the capacity in technology, as the leader of the Technion, as Israel Institute of Technology, now with campuses in Roosevelt Island in New York and Guangzhou province in China, but just the role of education and inclusion, financial and STEM education and other ways of building that out.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you for inviting me. The Technion, Israel Institute of Technology, is the first university in Israel, 8 months before the Hebrew University. Although they claim they were built in the same year, 8 months mean.
When you're talking about 2,000 years.
1912. 1912. And the Technion is behind what is known now as Startup Nation. Our most precious products are our graduates. Israel is number 3 on NASDAQ with respect to the number of companies, and 75% of them were either funded or run by our graduates. Our graduates founded 2,000 companies in the last 20 years. Half of them are alive today. And interestingly enough, when I asked Mayor Bloomberg, when we won the competition together with Cornell to build a research institute in New York to help the economy of New York, why did you pick the Technion? He said, you took Jaffa oranges and you turned them into semiconductors. I would like you to do the same for the city of New York. And when I asked the governor of Guangdong, why did you pick the Technion for Guangdong Technion? It's a new university in the city of Shantau. He said, because of what you did to the economy of Israel. So we know how to educate innovative entrepreneurs. And universities should have also a social mission. One of the problems of the Israeli society is the disparity between the Arab sector and the Jewish sector. If I can have slide 48, It can show the participation of Arabs and Jews in the labor force. The next slide shows women, Arab women and Jewish women participation, and you can see that there's a huge disparity. By the way, this is not unique to Israel. The next slide shows across the Arab world, and Arab women in Israel have about the same percentage participation as in many, many other countries, and even more. 10 years ago, only 7% of the students in the Technion were from the Arab sector. Dropout rate was 70%, which means they couldn't make it. And we took upon ourselves in a structured way to change it in order to build a role model for the Arab sector by providing enhanced education to high school kids from the Arab sector. And we did it in a very systematic way. 8 years, fast forward, 20% of our students come from the Arab sector. Dropout rate is very similar to the overall dropout rate in the Technion. And most interestingly, more women than men studying science and engineering, which is a major revolution in the Arab society. So if you come to the Technion, you see more Arab women studying science and engineering. So we built for the Arab sector in Israel a role model. And we just conducted a survey on employment. 90% of our graduates from the Arab sector found a job within the high-tech sector less than a year after graduation from the Technion. I truly believe that this can be a model for other universities. It can be a model in Rwanda to take a university and to build a structured program to build the human capital that is needed to really energize the economy. And the way we did it, maybe I can talk about it later.
Yeah, or you can also speak, if you could speak to some of these SDG challenges, Sustainable Development Goal challenges, say in global health, the things on something that Eli's been working on in the latest cabinet decision on digital health, but also looking at diagnostic devices or in energy, in terms of energy alternatives, to fuel alternatives to oil, and to polluting factors, just some of the case studies that you've
Well, the Technion is now developing for Africa diagnostic procedures supported by the Gates Foundation. The device that we are in really progress stage is for TB, and it will be based on a $1.50 device. This is the type of research that is motivated by a social responsibility. We have several companies that are now operating in China with respect to water purification. And our program in China is all converged on the environment. We started 4 programs in China: chemical engineering, biotechnology, material science and engineering, and food engineering, all converging on improving the environment, with, again, the support of the Guangdong provincial government and the Li Ka-shing Foundation. So I believe that one of the pillars of universities is social mission, and they can really be tremendous help to countries in a developmental stage.
So let's go to another application, another area.
First, I just had a comment on the labor participation chart. I am sure those women numbers are wrong because I don't think they count all the women's labor.
Well, that's for sure. Let's shift it over to Janet McKinley for a moment, who has been working at one of the big structural gaps in the supply of capital to some of the key motors for developing economies, which is the small business sector, the small
business. This is not a highly scientific slide, but if you could bring up 40, it's just to give you a sense of what we're looking at here. So we're not quantifying the exact numbers of micro businesses in the informal sector or micro businesses in the formal sector. It's just to give you a sense of the general enormity of the number of small businesses that are out there in the world and what kind of access they have in general to financing. So I worked in the investment business for my career, and starting in about 1990, my husband and I spent a lot of time offline philanthropically looking at how to help scale up microfinance. And what we discovered is that some of the best tools are often putting up guarantee money to make things happen, as opposed to direct investing, but we can come back to that. In any case, you see the big number of micro businesses. I was proud to be involved in that scale up, but at the end of it all, when you look at what's happened over time, you see that despite some of the rhetoric in the microfinance area around the woman starts with a $30 loan and she gets a baby pig, and then she has, makes some more money and she gets some more baby pigs, or she starts a fish pond, and next thing you know, she's running her own brick factory. I wish that were the case, but the reality is that microfinance has been a very, very good tool to manage women's vulnerability. When the child gets sick, when the husband loses the job, that kind of thing. It's been enormously powerful. What it hasn't done, and I don't think people would have expected it to do it, is to generate much in the way of employment or gravitate into the formal economy. So if you look at a graph with the real numbers of the number of microcredit women, or it's mostly women anyway, operations, they don't tend to go over to the formal economy. They tend to just be what they are. And so as a result, you've got a little bit of credit operations in the formal economy, but then you get up one more step. The small and medium, that's the so-called missing middle that people have been talking about for a number of years, where the businesses are too big to get microfinance loans that are relevant to them. And while they may have a bank account, they're generally not of great interest to most local banks to generate financing for them, or understand even how to structure what they need. So I decided to shift my attention to how do you get at financing the smaller end of the SME space on this chart here. And so there's lots of tools in the toolbox for doing these things. Some are philanthropic, and we're happy to use those. As I say, sometimes it's a guarantee. But I decided in this case that the thing that would be most workable for me to do would be to start a company, an investment management company with a fund that was financing smaller businesses in the formal sector through a brilliant, brilliant concept. It dates back to the Roman Empire. It actually dates back to, I think it's the Code of Hammurabi. It's referenced there indirectly, which is the good old factoring of receivables. So you had the Roman trade routes, and you had to get the grain out of Egypt and into a warehouse and onto a boat, and then off of that and onto camels, and get it to arrive in Rome without bandits having stolen it. And there were agents all along the trade route that were putting up money. It got it this far, it got it this far, and so on. And the word at that time for agent was factor, hence this bizarre word factoring of receivables. So I said, well, if it worked since then, I think I can probably do this. So we set up a company. It's based in London. It's FCA registered. The fund has been open to investors for the last 3 years. We're just coming up on our 3rd birthday in May, so that's a big deal. And what we're doing is we are not directly financing these small businesses because that's not economic. And it's really not so useful to be outside of that region and parachuting in with financing where you may not stay there. There's a lot of that moving around of philanthropic finance, if you want to call it that, or blended finance. Attention spans change in the developed world, but the need goes on in the developing world. So our goal was to identify countries where there was rule of law as regards the financing of invoices, and then do a deeper dive and identify who in that country is doing this now. And what we discovered is that most of those factoring companies in the developing countries are themselves kind of small businesses. They're not as small as their customers, but they're small. And so what we're bringing to them is a revolving line of credit, and then it's backed by assigned confirmed invoices from their book of business. So we're not asking them to do something special for us. We're saying, show us your book of business. We'll make a judgment call on the risk we're willing to take within your book, and that's what we will finance. And so the magic words are assigned confirmed invoices. A confirmed invoice means that the goods or services were delivered to the buyer accepted them as being in good order, and that is an irrevocable promise to pay. So in addition to bringing our financing for these non-bank financials in the factoring business, we also brought them a fairly rigorous legal document that they had to understand and agree to. And this is something that's come up, I think, a few times in different sessions here. We talk about what's lacking in a lot of these places in the world that makes it difficult to make progress. I would say one of the biggest deficits in the world is not a financial deficit, it's a trust deficit. So when we come to this factoring intermediary and we say, we would like to extend this revolver to you, but these are your obligations if you take the revolver. And they're very clear, and in many cases, it requires them to be more rigorous than they have been in the past. So it's not easy for them to do it. But if they say that they are going to do it, we will extend an initial size revolver, and then we'll work with them and see, are you doing what you said you were going to do? And if they are, then we will gradually increase the size of the revolver. And it may be too arcane, but this timing of when small companies get paid is at the heart of this. If small companies got paid really quick after they delivered the goods or services, we wouldn't need this service.
And they survive a lot longer, too.
Exactly, exactly.
This is such an important point in terms of looking at development economics, because the micro sector, and we all love a fantastic colleague, Nobel laureate, Mohammed Yunus is a wonderful person. But we look at in terms of the economic impact, and both Joe Stiglitz has made this point, as has Louise Fox, who couldn't join us today, the chief economist at USAID, as a labor economist, that basically people were just sort of rotating at the bottom of the secondary labor market through micro businesses to dependency to the informal economy, and not growing the economy in terms of aggregate demand that could serve projects that we're looking at financing or prepare a labor force. So this is a major, this missing middle argument is so fundamentally key. And Janet's an impact investor. I just want a new class of investors have grown up here in the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I guess I've essentially designed a fund that I wanted to invest in. And I figured if it met my criteria, probably most people would find that.
How do you measure your impact?
We measure our impact in a variety of ways. One way is actually how much financing can we get out there on site. So the absolute amount of money that is able to be absorbed and put to work responsibly by the factors matters. Mm-hmm. And then in addition to that, we want to see what kind of impact that has for those small businesses. Because what's happening is that as their invoices are getting paid off by the buyer, that money that the investors put in could easily turn 4 times a year. So you're getting good velocity on that. So that's quite important. We also want to see
velocity and leverage.
Well, that's important.
Amplifies the amount of capital.
We want to see and this is something
how much capital have you put to work?
We've put to work now where the fund is approaching $70 million.
And how much have you done?
So we have. I want to get the numbers right here because I'm very proud of them. But
can we pull up that slide, or is it?
Yes, we can pull up the slide. It's.
Might as well jump to that because that's such an impressive.
Yeah, slide 42. Yeah, absolutely. So we have financed about $600 million. Actually, the number's probably higher as we speak today.
That's not bad.
So $600 million off a baby fund. We have done factoring finance in 55 countries because we wanted to literally get the lay of the land. We're not in all 55 of them now. It's more like 30. We have financed, at this stage, I think we've probably gotten close to or across the 3,000 SME firms number, which is very good. The number I am actually most proud of, in a way, isn't on this slide, which is the average value of the invoice that's being financed. It's $6,000. So we've heard a lot from different folks in these panels, and they're talking about very big numbers. So seeing that $6,000 tells me that we are targeting actually the lower end of the small business, but in the formal economy. That's extremely important to me because, as everybody in this room knows, that's where the jobs get created. That's where taxes get paid. It's absolutely essential.
So let's move on from here.
Can I just ask one question?
Sure.
Do you see disruptive technology changing how this gets done? Because a lot of how you can lever this more is based on the quality of the information and how fast that information can move. So are you starting to see some of the newer technology coming in, potentially changing the way this gets done in a way that would help them?
Well, we're seeing a couple of things. We're seeing that governments are moving towards electronic invoicing. And that's a big deal because that's also going to enable them to be collecting a lot more in taxes. But it doesn't prevent fraud, but I think it will probably reduce the occurrence of fraud. And so that's important. And then because we are such a vibrant world and thinking about financial opportunities, you're starting to see some of the fintech companies are launching platforms where invoices, confirmed invoices, or actually not confirmed invoices in some cases, take your pick, are posted on the platform, and you could actually go in if you want and buy an invoice off the platform. Now, that all sounds great, and our initial reaction was, oh, this is going to be, it'll enable us to scale our own fund even faster, right? Well, I guess at this stage I would say, be careful, because as whiz-bang as that is, that bright, shiny object of the fintech invoice platform, there is factoring up knowledge that's needed. The technology is something that should make it work better, but it can't be the lead. It's got to be the thing that helps you do it. What we've seen is a number of these platforms are run by technology experts. They don't have experience in factoring. They've never been through a business cycle. And going back to this notion of trust,
Well, that's exactly so interesting. Because in the tech lab, in the fintech lab in Tel Aviv, there's a number of startups that are building on the experience base, not from the technology, but from the experience base, and building the technology up from the ground up, which is the way the tech sector really grew in the Signal Corps and other places. Let's move on, because I want to go back to, this is so important in terms of the business formation cycle. The demand for the business formation cycle comes from the ability to generate larger scale projects. And I want to go back to this notion of structuring. And what have you learned, Julie, and with your team globally on how that can and should be done?
I'm going to cover two different topics. I'll cover blended finance, some of the blended finance. So if they could, slide 70, please. So I think that with blended finance, a lot of people have different definitions of what blended finance is. And so when someone says, oh, we're going to talk about blended finance structure, that there's no one blended finance structure. And this slide is really to really articulate that. So blended finance at its highest level is strategic use of public resources, whether that's ODA or that's grants coming from a philanthropic fund, and blending that and mobilizing private sector capital, either from pension funds or banks or others, insurers. And I think what makes blended finance such a difficult topic in terms of how projects can get done in a blended finance model is that it can support a deal across the entire structure, right, of the deal. You can use blended finance up front in the project preparation. There's some great examples of that from the World Bank and the Global Infrastructure Facility that were highlighted last week at the IMF meetings, which if I have a minute I'll touch upon. But it can go all the way from the project preparation or layer in that type of grant money all the way through the structuring. And so when we talk about blended finance, and again, blended finance has been a topic for a long, long time. But I think what we see as a turning point is that we see certain models emerging, which are up on this page, and I'm not going to go through them in detail, but you can see the use of grants, where the grant can actually be placed right into the financial structure as a way to get the right return and the right outcome. And the first example there is related to a development impact bond. You have, it can be used in junior equity as part of how that gets embedded into the transaction. And then you can have market rate debt or equity. This particular transaction actually is one that I do want to highlight, because one of the things that's going on in the industry is there are industry groups that have come together with this recognition that we have to get to this flywheel effect. It's great that we're doing all this innovation, but when we're doing them one at a time, we're never going to get there in the time period to fill these gaps. And so SDIP is an industry group that has been pulled together to bring all the right resources and expertise to the table, because there was this view that in a lot of the developing countries that needed the most help, the deals were just getting stuck. And this really came out of discussions around Power Africa, because Power Africa got launched many years ago, and there was a lot of sort of discussion about it, but we kept seeing the deals get stuck. And so the example here for the Canadian Road Annuity Program, this deal was stuck. It was dead in the water. And it was because they didn't have it structured correctly. And so what CITIP has done is it's put together experts of people from the industry. We have participations from Citi, but there's also people sitting there from insurance, asset managers, from governments, from the World Bank, various representatives. And it's almost like a virtual deal team of the best experts. And so what CITIP is committed to do is that they want to actually crowd in $100 billion worth of financing for these toughest projects that we can't get done in these developing countries by letting them bring the project to this group, and this group gives them feedback early on, and this group gave them feedback on some of the things that had to change in the project preparation and what to look out for, because the company that was working on this project, sometimes the companies don't have the knowledge. Then they came back and they gave them tons of ideas on the structuring, and that led to this project going from being unbankable to bankable. Right. In a very short period of time, and trying to condense that. And so those are some of the things we're trying to scale up in the industry, because we need, again, at the lower end where you do need some sort of blended finance to get it over the line, it's how do we get it to scale up a little bit and get a lot more of it happening.
That's brilliant.
Glenn,
I'm sorry, please.
Yeah, if I could just build on that, we have a very similar experience where, as a government, we think that if you bring expertise that understands a project, they can actually help you structure it in a way that the market can respond to better than government would ever do. And I think
that's the project design.
The project, yeah, design. But I think there's Netafim in the room. We just entered a very good structure with
we were just talking about.
Because we're trying to attract investments in agriculture, and it was a very difficult thing to make it viable.
Is for the extension of drip.
Yes, irrigation, but also bringing investors in the irrigated land to, provide certain exports that we wanted to promote. I think bringing expertise like Netafim was very helpful, because they understand the deal, they have confidence in the market. When you deal with Netafim, then, because they have expertise, they have a reputation, it's actually easier for them not only to bring the technical knowledge and expertise to design the project, but also to be able to attract investors directly in the project because of the network that they come with. And we found that a very good way to actually bring the right structuring for a project.
And that's precisely the point of the intervention, where technology, financial technology, and operational technology, I know at the Development Impact Labs at Development Engineering up at Berkeley, the work that's being done to try to blend those things around food, energy, and water, which probably covers about 70% of the SDGs. If you pull up slide number 14 for a moment, this was something when we were looking at the Power Africa Challenge that came up in the session we had at the FinTech Lab, which was to try to operationalize this on some type of revolving fund structure that Israel could participate in. And this is one of those questions. You'll see some of the layers in there are blending together, possible first loss guarantees, were they to be available from the General Accountant's Office, because there really is this catalytic nature that Eli was describing was so key in building that tech sector that's generating 40% of our exports and the majority of our foreign exchange reserves in Israel. So, but doing that at the level that is driving these developing economies further. And then just slide 13 is these elements we keep coming back to, and I want to take it back to panelist is this charge that Eli and his teams have been driving with folks out of the private sector to combine both the capacity, social and human capital capacity that gets deployed onto these projects, and to work on project designs that feed the pipeline, and then the expertise to package it as Julie was just describing. And then the project technology, that's really Technion, Hebrew University, I have to remind you as well, but all the Ben Gurion and other places as well, but also the Israel Innovation Authority that we'll hear from, as being and the agreements now with the University of California Office of the President, and with President Apollo there next week to talk exactly about mobilizing that, and then the finance level of all the elements that Julie was just mentioning. Mm-hmm. But let's do another round quickly on some of the ideas that could be generated and how they come together on this. Eli?
If I may just react to some of the things we've seen and heard over the last few minutes, there was talk about blended finance, and it's important to understand, Julie said it could mean a lot of things to a lot of people. The very fact that it's blended shows that there's different constituencies with different interests. Some interests might be financial, other interests might be geopolitical, other interests might be small business, large business, governments. There's a range of interests, and the whole concept behind this blended finance, doesn't matter which model you go to, is that it's a way to address each constituent's interest in a risk-adjusted way, so that we can advance the betterment of the developing world. And the only other thing I would add, Glenn, is that on this panel you're seeing a range of people representing different points on the spectrum, except for one, and that's the group. With all due respect to universities, it's the group that's actually driving most of the innovation, and that's the private sector.
Absolutely.
And as far as governments are concerned, particularly the government of Israel, because our economy is so based on innovation, it's in our economic interest to open markets for our innovative industries, right? If we have these phenomenal technology companies which are driving economic growth in Israel, but half the world is shut off to those markets, and it's in our economic interest. Not just our diplomatic interest, not just etc. It's our economic interest to open up those markets for them. That was the thinking behind everything we're doing around our strategy for the developing world. That was the thinking behind the Power Africa initiative, the MOU, which we used to sort of leverage Israeli ingenuity along with Power Africa and US's sort of tent to enable Israeli technologies to penetrate Africa. And we're looking at this both in small business opportunities, the kind of which might benefit from factoring, as well as major, large infrastructure initiatives where it wouldn't just be World Bank, governments, and Israeli institutional investors that would be involved. We'd love to get people like Citi and others involved in this as well.
Institutional, yeah.
That's their mission.
It is our.
I just want to pull up slide 16. So how does this project chain come around? And how do we? We're in the training business, and Madhuyama Subramanian was one of the MVP students from Berkeley, came over and interned at Netafim, worked along with him on a project in Tamil Nadu. You get a water savings of 40 to 50%, 30% higher yields. We believe a lot in higher yields at this conference. And then a 36% reduction in CO2 emissions. That's one that Al Gore and Richard Sandor would all agree to as well. Reducing warming, and these are the types of outcomes but we need to deploy a small army, actually a large army, of people that would be able to develop those projects. Just go on to slide 18. Another one was from University of California at San Diego, slide 18. Arun Salavendra, also from India. I don't work. We have Mexicans and Chinese and a lot of other people working on this. And he was working on this idea of taking ag tech IP, which is one of our fellows there at the Volcani Institute, and operationalizing that, of ways of trying to deal with, in slide 22, this chain in the ag sector, of building the value chain. We'll hear in the next session from Professor Zilberman a little bit more in depth about dealing with each stage of proof of concept, cultivation, and the 30, 40% of post-harvest that we lose just because of lack of storage and chillers and in the supply chain and ag. So all of these are ways of addressing those SDGs and trying to train the teams as the ones that you've been working with in Rwanda. But again, it requires co-innovation. It requires the type of exchanges and the project designs and the financial innovations to do so. But let's just, any other comments that you guys would like? Yes, Peretz.
Innovation maybe comes from the private sector, but universities are the source of these talented people.
That's what Albert
And
Einstein said when he opened Hebrew University in 1920.
Yes. And this is why I believe that
It's an internal thing.
any government that seeks innovation should invest in higher education. This is a return on investment. This is the best investment of any
And a return on
country.
life, too.
Yes.
Yes,
A thought,
Janet.
we're at I think the end of a 35-year bull market in bonds. We've had a spectacular run in equities since the Great Recession. So, that's probably not going to be looking the same as we look out for the next 5 to 10 years. I'm not sure investors have gotten their head around what a reasonable expected return might be in the future. My sense in talking to investors about our fund, and we outline a return expectation of from 5 to 8% net, depending on the circumstances in a given year and where we're operating. And some people react to that and say, that's just not high enough. Well, God didn't promise anybody a 12% return. So I'm going to say that if you target investing in the real economy with real people, it will not only probably work out to be as good or better an investment than you have on offer now, given how big a run we've had in both of these
Pull up
markets.
slide 11 for a minute. We'll see what the yields look like, that people are looking at. Okay. We can definitely do better than this. Negative, have $8 trillion in negative yielding instruments. I believe that any of the projects
Yes.
Exactly. But that's the notion I was saying to Glenn when we first got together. I said the world's got a glacier, and the small businesses need ice cubes. So you got to figure out how to turn the glacier into ice cubes or ice chips in some cases.
This is what Dr. Kim was making the point, slide 10. This is the gap we're trying to build, is that billions to trillions. Right. But we can do it. I mean, I think we've heard ways. Do you want to mention just any closing projects?
If you go to page 72, I'm going to go to the other end of the spectrum, is we've got to get to a scalability. And we firmly believe that the only way you're going to get to scalability is if you get institutional investors to invest in large projects, and we start to make this an asset class and get infrastructure to be an acceptable asset class. And so, there's two examples up there that are specifically financing the SDGs, because one is related to infrastructure and the other one related to health. But I think the important thing about the project, the Mexico City Airport, which is the largest ever green bond in the emerging market, is that traditionally, when these projects got done, it was very difficult to get the financing up front, right, during the construction phase. So how do you de-risk it during the construction phase? And what we did was we set up a revolver, and we took the income from the existing airport, and that was pledged against an SPV. And that allowed them not to have a negative carry during the construction period. It also created a very clean story to the investors, because we were never drawing down more money than what the existing airport. And when it got launched, it wound up being the largest project bond ever. It is the most liquid infrastructure asset in Latin America. It just got included in Morningstar's infrastructure index that they just created, which was something that was discussed about 1.5 years ago at the World Bank, of how do we get an index. So this is on the higher end. I know we're talking about Mexico and a larger economy, but this is where it's going to have to go. For us to go from billions to trillions in terms of closing this financing gap, we are going to have to get the institutional money to understand infrastructure projects and get it packaged this way.
And if she succeeds, there'll be a lot of small businesses in that neighborhood that get contracts.
Yes.
And
we have succeeded.
Also in the infrastructure projects in Rwanda.
All number of things.
Yeah, and then the other project was a blended finance model that allowed there to be a private money in financing hospitals across Turkey. So it's happening. Some major projects are happening.
So global health, 58% of all economic growth in the last 200 years has been generated by improvements in health. Mm-hmm. So the digital health initiatives, the building out the systems, making sure they're cyber secure in terms of health records, all of these things come together and a story that we can tell and keep building. So we've got to run over to drill into this in a working session for the next hour and a half. And please join us to celebrate the end of the conference and 70 years of the State of Israel and the launch of the reaching the SDGs in Africa and the rest of the developing world by 2030. Thank you.